Welcome back to the Champagne on Ice podcast presented by the Field of 68. We are finally back. College basketball season is readily approaching. We're less than 3 weeks away from Illinois tipping off against Eastern Illinois in the regular season, less than 2 weeks away from an exhibition game against Ole Miss. And we are back here to break it all down, break down what was an unbelievably active offseason for Brad Underwood and company, about as active as you can get even in today's day and age. I am Kyle Tausk, joined as always by my co-host Mike Farmer. How you doing, man? Welcome back. Good to see you again. Good to talk to you again. And is that college hoops itch back for you yet, like it is me?
I'm feeling it, man. I've got the North Carolina versus Memphis scrimmage on in the corner of my bedroom right now.
That's how you
I'm
know the
feeling
itch
good. I
is
can't
there.
wait for the season. Yeah, for sure.
Watching the
But yeah,
secret
good to be back.
scrimmage roundup.
Exactly these box scores from the preseason scrimmages coming in. Everybody on Twitter's all excited. I'm feeling it too, and I'm glad to be back on the podcast for year two. Shout out to Field of 68 for having us back for another year. Shout out to Kyle for being back with me, and yeah, it's going to be a hell of a year. I'm excited.
Yeah, should be fun. We just to go over a little bit of our plans, we will be releasing an episode at least once a week, usually on Mondays, just like we did last year. But for bigger games, we'll probably add in some extra episodes, some midweek episodes, especially when there's some big games like that Alabama game, some big conference games, just to make sure that we're not always waiting till 5, 6 days later. So might increase our output a little bit this year. Also, both of us will have some access to games this year, both covering the team for the Champagne Room over at SB Nation. So some together, some apart, but we'll get some extra insight to Brad Underwood and these players, bring that on the pod. So that should be fun. But that's kind of how we see things. Maybe get an occasional guest or two on throughout the year. We'll try our best on that. And yeah, I can't wait. This is going to be a fun year. As always, Brad Underwood has this program at a place where there's always expectations, coming off the Elite Eight last year and now 10 new guys. You got 2 returners back. I pulled up the numbers. We're going to get into kind of the 3 categories of players on this team, break down this roster. But Illinois brings back 13.7% of their minutes from last year, which is 16th in the Big Ten, 9.5% of their points, 17th in the Big Ten. Both of those, I think, are bottom 50 in the country as well. So, and yet Illinois is projected highly in the conference. So it's a fun time to be an Illinois basketball fan, that's for sure.
Yeah, not a ton of continuity on this year's roster from the Elite Eight team last year, but looking at the AP poll, not top 25, but Illinois gets 92 votes, I believe. They're number 26 in the country. You look at Ken Palm, they're top 25. I think Bart Torvik had a top 25. So that tells you something about the offseason that Illinois has had in terms of additions, whether it's a couple of five-star freshmen, some four-star freshmen as well, some international guys, some transfers from Arizona and a couple mid-major schools. You got some young talent coming in like Kerry Booth and Jake Davis from mid-major schools as well, and Notre Dame. So yeah, it's a hell of a season last year, obviously, with the Elite Eight appearance, the Big Ten tournament appearance, or Big Ten tournament title, excuse me. A couple really good players in Terrence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins, Marcus Damask. Those guys are all gone now, and we've got a very talented group of guys coming in. So we're gonna get in and we're gonna break it down for you guys real quick. 10 new players. So much to talk about. So I say we just get into it right now.
Yeah, let's get into it. Before we dive into the roster, since you brought it up, let's just discuss it real quick right now. I was going to save it till the end, but you bring it up. First day people dropped on Monday, Illinois 26th. So the first team outside of the top 25, the team receiving the most votes that didn't officially get ranked in the top 25. Problem with that or okay with it?
I really, I mean, I would like to see us ranked, but in the end, it does not matter at all. Like it's a group of kind of random college basketball journalists, AP journalists from across the country. It's a whole new roster. It's 10 players coming in that are completely new, 2 returners and Ty Rogers and Dre Gibbs Lawhorn. Like I get that people want to see us getting votes because of the success we've had the past 5 years. But in the end, if you go 2-0 in the first week of the season, Illinois is going to be in that top 25. Like it does not matter that much. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I don't really I think this team has a pretty high ceiling. We'll get into it and some of the pieces they have, but I don't blame somebody for not wanting to put them on their ballot the first week of the season, seeing that they've got two returning players back, and there's just a lot of unknowns on this team. I think we'll talk about it here later on in the episode and as we preview the season, but there is a very wide range of outcomes for this team. I don't think it's unfair to be lower on this Illinois team and skeptical of the fact that there's just no continuity there. I think it's fine to be really high on this team and think this is an Elite Eight Final Four caliber roster if things go together. But you know what? I think just being in the mix there, like 26th with 10 new players, with your best returning, your fifth starter last year being your only returning guy that played over 7 minutes a game, like that already in itself speaks to where Brad Underwood has this program and just kind of the reputation that Illinois has built up. I think for a lot of other teams with this situation, they wouldn't even be 26th. They'd be in the 40s or something like that. And I kind of like it for a change. Illinois has been in the preseason top 25, I believe, every year since 2019. And I kind of like for a change to be outside just at least to start the year, just to have something where if Illinois puts it all together towards the end of the year and Brad Underwood has this team winning the Big Ten, you can use that narrative of like, hey, this is an unranked preseason now, and maybe Brad can get that first coach of the year, which I think is more than deserved for him. But that's getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's get into the roster. Let's get into this offseason and some of the guys that Illinois has brought in. I broke the roster down into the three obvious groupings, and we'll just go one by one, give some general thoughts, and then kind of go player by player. Expectations, some thoughts on what that player can bring, what their role could look like. And by the end of this episode, we'll have gotten through this entire Illinois roster and previewed it. So let's start with the transfers. 5-man transfer class for Illinois. Brad Underwood has been very savvy in the portal, very aggressive in the portal since the one-time transfer rule was passed. And this is another nice class for Underwood and company in the portal. 5 guys, 19th in the country according to 24/7 Sports. The biggest name in there is probably Kylan Boswell from Arizona, and Illini fans more than familiar with him. Champaign native, grew up in Champaign, played at Urbana Middle School before going over to Arizona for high school. And a guy that Illinois finished in second to Arizona the first time around, but nowadays you know that you can't burn those bridges in recruiting because a guy like Kylan Boswell can hit the portal. You bring him into Illinois. A guy that averaged 9.6 points per game last year, started every game for a 2 seed in Arizona. Inconsistent year. He had some really big performances early in the year, really exploded against Duke at Cameron Indoor Stadium in a big win there. Also had some 0-point performances during the year, just some inconsistency, but what you know you're getting from him is a knockdown 3-point shooter, 38.2% from 3 for his career, shot 39% from 3 last year. A guy that really good defensively. That's something I think that's going to be important for this team as we get into things. I think that's one of the primary concerns about this roster, but I think Kylan Boswell has proven himself in that regard. And a true point guard, a guy who's played point guard at the high major level, and a guy that is a good passer, has really good vision, good table setter. We'll see if a jump is in store for him, the former 5-star prospect who I think has more in the tank than he's even shown so far, but he has already proven himself, probably as proven a guy as Illinois has on their roster. Thoughts on Kylan and adding Kylan Boswell from Arizona?
I mean, you really hit the nail on the head with a lot of the things I was going to talk about, but I think the main issue a lot of Illinois fans and I'm sure Arizona fans had with Kylan Boswell was the inconsistency over the past 2 years. Like you said, he goes off in that Duke game at Cameron Indoor Stadium early in the year. He looks like he could have been Arizona's best player in that game. And then you get down to the end of the season, and I think I was looking at his game log today, and the last 5 or 6 games of the season, only one of the games he broke 5 points. The last game of the year, they played Clemson in the Sweet 16, I believe, and he was kind of unplayable. He did play 20 minutes because he started off the game, but he became an issue for that team. But overall, like you said, I think he does have some stuff left in the tank, and I'm excited to see it this year. Not completely knocked down 3-point shooter, nearly 40% on his career. Can be a facilitator at the point guard, like you said, a true point guard, which Illinois kind of hasn't had in a couple of years at this point, because you had Ty Rogers running the point last year, which will not happen this year with Kylan Boswell. Boswell will play 30 minutes a game plus. I think he'll start every single game this year. He'll be steady at the point guard position. Brad Underwood mentioned he has extreme potential to be a big two-way player for Illinois this upcoming year. He said at the media day, he said he trimmed down a little bit. He worked on his speed, which Underwood was really impressed with. So that's encouraging to see already. But yeah, I'm very optimistic about Boswell personally. I think he's probably the most exciting transfer pickup. I know Ben Hanserhouse has a lot of potential as well from Evansville. But yeah, I could not be more excited for Boswell.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I think that's a big thing I'm interested to see from him. I believe he said on Friday that he was around 225 last year. Now he's about 204, 204, 205. So he really has trimmed down 15, 20 pounds. A guy that I think the one thing that I saw from him, for as steady as he was, good shooter, good passer. I didn't think he was very explosive his first 2 years at Arizona. I thought that there was more left for him. He wasn't necessarily that guy, and even that's something Brad Underwood said on Friday too, was he's faster than he remembers when he initially recruited him on the AAU circuit and in high school. And I think that's a product of some of the work he's done on his body. But that's something where he can really take his game to the next level, I think, is I just didn't think he was very quick. I didn't think he was a guy that could really break you down and beat guys off the dribble, especially better defenders on the perimeter. Maybe you get a little more of that this year, and that expands his offensive game a little bit more. And I think he's going to get opportunities to do that because, like you said, you look at this roster and you're trying to project lineups and rotations, and I think maybe about the most sure thing in this entire rotation heading into this year is that Kylan Boswell is going to be playing a lot of minutes at point guard and starting. And you can't say that about a lot of guys in terms of just knowing exactly where he's going to slot in. But I think it's pretty solidified what Boswell's going to do. And yeah, I think regardless, I think that his defense is going to be really important. He's a physical, bigger bodied guard on defense, but he can stay with guys. He's guarded a lot of smaller, quicker guards in the Pac-12, and his shooting, I think, is going to be huge as well. He's been a knockdown shooter. He can play. We'll get to in the freshman section his backcourt mate, who I think will have the ball in his hands quite a bit, and so I think you could play him off the ball and spot him up and shoot a little bit. And he's proven to be good at that. So, yeah, I think I'm excited about what Kylan Boswell can bring. And also the storyline, the extra added storyline of coming back home and doing it all will be fun, too. I enjoyed getting to talk to him on Friday, and I think he's got a jump ahead of him this year. He was a good player, good high major starter at Arizona last year. I think he's got another gear, especially with 2 years here, hopefully, at Illinois. Never say that for sure, right? But hopefully with 2 years here at Illinois, I think he could be one of the better guards in the Big Ten by the time he's done here. I will let you go with the next guy, Trey White.
Trey White. So I gotta say, and I think a lot of Illinois fans agreed with me, when Trey White committed, and there were rumors about Trey White visiting and stuff, committing kind of early in the offseason, bit of a questionable pickup based on where he was playing last year at Louisville. Just a train wreck of a season for the Louisville Cardinals last year. And so that can be kind of tough on a guy to project, like, is he going to bounce back from that? Did he pick up some bad habits from playing with a pretty awful team? But that's the thing we're going to have to see. Brad Underwood at Media Day said Trey White has been the most consistent player in an Illinois uniform from day one this offseason. So that's encouraging to say the least. I was looking at Trey White, like just watching highlights of Trey White, watching and doing a little scouting report today, actually. And I don't know if he really has like a go-to offensive, a niche on offense, an offensive move he can go to, a position on the court where he's really just electric consistently every single night, which is a bit interesting because tying into just how that's a kind of a questionable pickup from Louisville. And as well as his defense can be a bit of a question mark at times. A lot of Louisville fans were concerned about his effort, his defensive intensity last year. So Illinois and the Brad Underwood and his coaching staff are going to have to work hard on that. And it seems like Trey White has really changed his mentality. He's really benefited from a change of scenery in his third year because he was at USC year one, transferred to Louisville, and now he's at Illinois in year three. So he's been in a lot of places. Trey White, definitely a good rebounder for his size. I believe is 6'6" or 6'7" at the forward position. He can get to the hoop pretty well. And yeah, I'm not sold on him being a starter considering the amount of depth we have at wing and forward. But I think he will be a pretty consistent, at least 20-minute per game player every single night. Just not sold on him being on the starting lineup. But I think sixth or seventh man is definitely potentially where Trey White is going to be at for the team this season. So I'm not sure I'm completely sold on Trey White being a bona fide, uh, very solid contributor every single night, but I think he will find a role on this team by the end of the season. So I'm excited. I'm curious to see how he will perform this season.
Yeah, I'm with you. When Illinois first got him, it was one of those kind of weird, like all of a sudden, who's this guy committing to Illinois? This guy wasn't. You hear all these names and guys floating around and guys that hit the portal of like, oh, I think Illinois is going to go after this guy, or you follow the Twitter rumors or the message board stuff and all that, and you have a pretty good idea of kind of what some of the names are. Trey White came out of nowhere. He committed to Illinois, and I had no idea. I hadn't heard his name before. Didn't really know much about him. Didn't really love his fit based on what his numbers and his production was at Louisville last year, and I was just a little scared in general about that train wreck that Kenny Payne was running over there about getting anybody from there. But he's grown on me a lot diving into him and just what he can be, because I do think you look at his career so far, like you said, started a freshman at USC, played 27 minutes a game on that USC team as a freshman, a team that went to the NCAA tournament, was a guy that was on NBA radars after that year, ended up transferring to Louisville, and it was just a train wreck over there. Louisville was about as pathetic a team as you'll see at the high major level, and so you look at some of the things, and he was much more efficient as a freshman. Defensively, you look at that. That's, I think, going to be a big key for him. He was a good defender as a freshman. You look at some of the advanced analytics, and he graded out as an above-average defender as a freshman. Graded out terribly last year at Louisville. Like you said, I think effort and just intensity on that side of the floor was a part of that, but I feel like everybody was checked out at Louisville last year. So am I willing to give him a pass for just, a team that had pretty much quit midway through the year? A little bit. I think I kind of am. I'm interested to see if maybe he can revert back to some of the things and some of the promise that he showed as a freshman at USC, because that player was a 6'7", good defender, good athlete, a slasher, a guy who could get to the rim efficiently, a guy who had a really good mid-range shot. Hasn't been a great three-point shooter throughout his career, so we'll see where that comes into play. Shot 29% from three, I believe, last year. That's his career high, one of the 2 years. So hasn't really been efficient from three, but he's kind of a slasher, a guy who can get to the rim, good athlete, guy he can play above the rim. He's a guy who will get inside, and I think it'll be interesting to see, can we get the USC version with a step forward from Trey White? Can he be a guy? I think defensively, that's where a big impact can be made, because you look at this team and you need that length on the defensive end. There's really good wings in the Big Ten. Can you have a guy like him give you 20 minutes a game and use his length to bother people? And then offensively, just can he take a step forward efficiency wise from last year? Could he be a threat from three, but can he be a guy that's really aggressive in terms of attacking the basket, using his athleticism, and being an athlete at the wing position for Illinois? I think all those things are in his skill set. The question will be, can you coach some of those habits that had gone bad out of him from last year at Louisville? I'm willing to give that a chance, because, like you said, I wasn't super high on his fit here at Illinois when Illinois first got him, but a lot of the things that have permeated out of training camp and out of the offseason are that he, like you said, has been really consistent, has been a guy that's just brought a consistency at pretty much every facet of the game. And if he can bring Illinois that with his size and his unique skill set based on what this team has, I think he could play a pretty big role. But it'll be interesting to see if that comes to fruition, because we have kind of gotten two different versions of him in his 2 years.
But Underwood did say at media day that number one, he's been a much improved shooter, like much better than the staff even expected in this whole offseason, and he can guard multiple positions. So, I mean, I might have been a bit harsh in my previous comments about Trey White a couple minutes ago. I'm completely willing to give him a chance. I'm not writing him off by any means. I'm just saying, like the Louisville season was a complete disaster. Um, But yeah,
And he
he will have
said
to improve shooting wise, of course.
He said
Go
too.
ahead.
Well, something he said was that the reason he wanted to come to Illinois was because he was sick of losing last year, and he wanted to be in a winning environment. And he thought that in order for him, he has goals of ultimately getting to the NBA. We'll see how realistic that is for him. But in order to do that, he needed a winning environment and a winning culture. Saw that at Illinois. That it's hard to be your best self at such a train wreck like Louisville was. And that's why I think a little bit of what he did last year should probably be taken with a grain of salt. But we'll see.
Another thing I remember seeing when we picked him up, I'm going on like message boards and seeing what Louisville fans think of Trey White. They were calling him the laziest, most just like useless basketball player, especially defensively, that they'd ever seen. And then at media day, well, this is why it's beneficial to like be covering the team this year. We've got a little bit more insight on certain things. Trey White was the most energetic, friendliest person I've ever seen. I'm not saying that's translating to him being a all Big Ten talent on the court, but I'm just saying clear change in personality and attitude, I think, at least in the off season. We'll see how it turns out on court this season. But yeah, I think there is some reason to believe Trey White can be his USC self at Illinois this year.
Yeah, you're right. He was probably one of my favorites to talk to on Friday for sure. And it just you can see that. Yeah, it's the laziness thing. It's one thing if it was a guy who is just physically limited or doesn't have the size or whatever it is. When you're hearing that stuff like this is a lazy player, this is a guy who it, that type of stuff, you have to consider the environment. And I think you could find a lot of lazy players on Louisville by the end of last year. So I think, you never know what a different environment, a different coaching staff, and just actual success can do to a player. And so Trey White has grown on me a lot, and diving into him, I think he has an opportunity if he can have some of those things from last year coached out of him, or just turn himself around in that regard, and things like effort and that type of stuff. I think his skill set is pretty useful to this team, and something Illinois doesn't really have in other spots. So we'll see on that. Let's get to Benham Rickhouse. This is a very interesting transfer, a guy that was very highly recruited in the portal, but it kind of flew under the radar at the same time. It was interesting. It's a guy that felt like a lot of people wanted. Illinois won a very competitive recruitment for him, but he played his first 3 years at the NAIA level at Huntington, transferred to Evansville last year, played in the Missouri Valley, averaged 15 a game, shot 41% from three, and 6'9", probably play the four mostly for Illinois. But this was a guy that was highly sought after. Illinois won a competitive battle for a couple in-state. I know Indiana was a team that wanted him. Louisville was a team under their new coach. Thankfully, Kenny Payne's gone now, and they wanted him bad. So, but Benham Rickhouse is a guy, just an elite shooter, really, really good shooter. Like Brad uses the term elite a lot, and sometimes it's not warranted. It's warranted when talking about him.
He's
Rickhouse's
actually
shooting.
elite.
He is an elite shooter, especially catch and shoot, but he can do some things off the dribble as well. And yeah, I think that's his skill set is really unique in terms of what Illinois can do. You could see maybe some of the booty ball matchup hunting type of stuff with him, with his size and his ability to rise up and shoot. He's a good mid-range shooter as well. Not something he does a ton, but he's capable of doing that. But his three-point shooting, he's going to be the best shooter on this team. He's going to be a guy that's spacing the floor in a lot of different lineups. He's going to be a guy that gets a lot of catch-and-shoot opportunities from Boswell, from Yakichonis, who we'll get to in a little while, and from some of the athletes that Illinois has. Finding him open shots, I think, is going to be huge, and he can fit in pretty much any lineup. Question marks for him, obviously defense, a guy who's not really a plus athlete, and somebody who struggled to guard a little bit at Evansville. You think about what some of the fours in the Big Ten, especially some of the more physical, athletic power forwards that Illinois could see. Little bit of a concern there on the defensive end. We'll see. He was a decent rim protector, actually. Showed some of that at Evansville, but a guy that in one-on-one situations, guarding in space, has struggled. Not the most laterally quick, and that's going to be a concern for him. But you hope that his offense will make up for that. His shooting ability will make up for that, and there's no doubt about it. He's gonna have some big scoring nights for this Illinois team.
Yeah, I'm already sold on Ben Hummerkaus as a potential All Big Ten player, just given his offensive capabilities, especially as a shooter. I'll be honest, I don't have too much to say about him because you kind of covered it all. Completely knockdown shooter from 3-point range, especially. Can get you some buckets back to the basket, can play in the low post a little bit, but I'm not anticipating too much of that given the Illinois front court depth with Merez, with Tom Slav, with Kerry Booth, etc. He's a legit potential NBA player. I was reading some article earlier today, and if you look at Hummerkaus's advanced analytics from last year, like his 3-point attempts per possession, his 3-point percentage, his box plus minus, stuff like that, his assist rate. He's also a really good passer. You look at some of that stuff and you compare it to or if you sort it by certain categories and stuff, he's in a category with, I believe, four other NBA players, and the entire category is just him and four NBA players like Duncan Robinson, Cam Johnson when he was in college. And that just goes to show he has the skill set, he has the complete capabilities of a potential future NBA player. Not a star, but even if he's a role player coming from an NAIA school for 3 years, like that's unbelievable. So I think Brett Underwood and the staff made a beautiful pickup in the portal with Ben Hummerkaus.
Yeah, I believe Jonathan Cavoni of ESPN released his top 100 big board last week, and Humrikas was 79th on it. So he is a legitimate NBA prospect. I think what teams will want to see is can he hold up defensively and things like that. Can he add a little bit more to his offensive game in terms of attacking closeouts and being a threat around the basket? We'll see on that. What we do know is that he's going to be an elite shooter. Brad Underwood already is talked about how many shots he's made in practice, and we've seen some of the clips posted, and his stroke is quick release. A guy can rise up over almost anybody with his size. And yeah, I think his versatility too. Illinois can play him in pretty much any lineup that they want to on this team, and I think he fits. Whether they're going, with a lot of guards, and then he slides up and plays a position up, or whether he could even slide down and play more of the wing. I think he has that versatility to him. My expectation is that he probably starts at the 4 for this team. We can end this off after we get through all 12 players with maybe a lineup prediction. My expectation is a pretty solidified role starting at the 4 spot for Illinois, 25 plus minute a game guy, assuming all goes well on that front. But yeah, I think that this is a guy that fits anywhere, and his shooting, I think he might be. I was having this discussion with somebody else earlier, but he might be the second best shooter that Brad Underwood has had behind Alfonso Plummer. Hard to top Plummer as a shooter. I think Ben Humrikas might be the second best. Has a chance to maybe even be better than Plummer, although Plummer's movement shooting was pretty unbelievable. But just a dead-eye knockdown shooter, and that's going to be important for this team. Let's move on to Kerry Booth, transfer from Notre Dame. I'll let you kind of start things off on him.
Yeah, Kerry Booth, super young, had just NBA potential coming out of high school, going into his first year at Notre Dame. Another team kind of like Louisville, they didn't have a great season, so he was kind of in a tough position there in at Notre Dame. Didn't show a whole lot in his freshman year, but you can still see flashes of a raw potential, a guy with NBA potential that's a bit raw. And so that's kind of what I'm expecting this year. I'm not expecting a massive jump from Kerry Booth, but even Brad Underwood talked about when Kerry Booth was mentioned in his presser, just complete freak athlete. He can jump out of the gym, maybe the best athlete on the team. He's going to be a threat with lobs. Brad Underwood mentioned a couple guys that were great lob passers, like Will Riley, even Kasparis, I'm sure, Kylan as well. So that's definitely some lob potential in Champaign this year with Kerry Booth and some other guys. But yeah, he's still very young, completely kind of a raw prospect still. So we'll have to see. I'm not expecting a like elite offensive season by any means, as Brad Underwood would say. I think he has a lot of potential as a shot blocker, as a rim protector, because he's a big guy. He's 6'10", he's lanky, he's athletic, like I said. Putting on some weight would be nice, so he could be more physical in a pretty physical Big Ten conference. But I think he'll come off the bench this year. I know we talked about doing a starting lineup later, but I'm not projecting him as a starter by any means. I'm not seeing him as even a 20-minute per game guy, but I think if he stays in Champaign for a couple of years, because he does have 3 years of eligibility left, he could be a beast, man. But I'm not seeing a ton of production from him this year offensively, unless it's from 3-point range, which he needs work on. But Underwood said he's an elite shooter, which again I'm not sold on because he's got a hitch in his jump shot. I'm not sure if he's fixed it, and that's a lot of just Brad Underwood offseason talk about guys being elite when they actually don't end up being elite. But I'm really not trying to be negative. I'm just saying let's ground ourselves a little bit because
Yeah,
Brad Underwood does like to hype these guys up.
that one might be the hyperbole version of elite. Rickhouse elite. I buy that, but that might be one of the Bradism elite. I don't know about elite, but hey, I mean, I think uh, I'll let you finish first, but I think his shot is much better than he showed last year.
Yeah, I think it is, but not expecting a whole lot. If he can bump his percentage up a couple points, that would be great. That would help him a lot going into next offseason if he stays with Illinois. But yeah, not expecting a ton from Kerry Booth this year, but definitely a good depth piece to have.
Yeah, I think he'll be a part of the front court rotation, but probably number four in that mix. And yeah, he's a very intriguing player. A guy coming from Notre Dame, kind of thrown into the fire as a super young, one of the youngest teams in the country on Notre Dame last year. And he came in, he was a top 55 prospect. And he just kind of got thrown in there. I think he started a few games, but mainly came off the bench for them, and I think played 20 minutes a game about. But yeah, he's a stretch four. A guy that only shot 30% from three as a freshman, but I do believe he's a better shooter than that. I mean, that coming out of high school, that was maybe his best skill was his 3-point shot. Like you said, I think that there's a little bit of an adjustment that needs to take place with his form and with his jump shot. There is a little bit of a hitch in that, and I think if he irons that out, I think he'd be a much better shooter because other than that, I think he's proven that, and the athleticism too. I'm interested to see if he can take a step forward in terms of attacking the rim a little bit more and using that athleticism offensively. He's quicker than a lot of fours. Like he's 6'10", true size. He's the second tallest guy on the Illinois roster behind Thomas Lavavisic, but he's pretty quick and athletic. And there could be some matchups if you're playing teams like in Indiana or teams that play two slower big guys that aren't quite as laterally quick going out and guarding him on the perimeter. I'd be interested to see if he can use that athleticism, be a little more aggressive offensively than just waiting for that 3-point shot, because I do expect him to ultimately be a mid-30s shooter this year. That's probably my projection for him. I think he gets into that mid-30% range, and I think that's something that he's going to continue to get better at. That's something that another guy that has been on NBA radars coming off of last year, obviously a ways away from that, more development from that, pretty raw, like you said, but he projects as a good stretch for, like you said, couple years. I think he can ultimately be that elite shooter that Brad Underwood is referring to. But for now, I do think he'll probably be a guy that factors in at that 4 spot. Maybe we'll get to it in a little bit. If there's some eligibility concerns in the Illini front court with a certain guy, might have to play some 5. I don't know how effective that'll be, but he is a guy that is a true 6'10", good wingspan too, and a guy that can affect shots at the rim. Good help side rim protector as well. So I'm interested to see. I think this year will be about development for Kerry Booth. If he can take a step forward in a lot of areas and iron some things out, be a little bit more consistent in a lot of areas of his game, and maybe add a little bit more of that aggressiveness offensively and that around the rim ability, get a little bit better defensively. That'll be a good sign. This is a guy that I have a lot of hope for 2 years from now when we project that roster. This year, I think he'll be a solid rotational piece and a guy that can give Illinois some different looks in the front court.
Yeah, definitely. Just the intriguing thing about him is the NBA potential coming out of high school and the fact that he's only played 1 year in college. Like he told me at media day, I asked about some question about his freshman season at ND, and he's like, yeah, just everything was going a million miles an hour for me. Like you said, he was kind of thrown in the fire. ND wasn't a great team. He had to get minutes right away, started a couple games. So I think he's going to take a bit of a backseat this year, which in the end I think will help him, especially if he does stay in Champaign for a couple of years, like we're all hoping. But yeah, not expecting a ton from Kerry Booth. I do love the defensive potential too, with the shot blocking and just the athleticism, but a bit of lesser expectations for Kerry Booth, I guess I'll say this year.
Final transfer on the list, Jake Davis from Mercer, averaged 9 points a game as a freshman, 39% from three. That's really what he is. He's a spot-up shooter and a guy that I don't anticipate playing a whole lot this year. More of a developmental guy, and we'll see what he can become as an upperclassman. I don't anticipate him, just with how crowded things are, really factoring in, barring major injury to some guys on the wing, to playing much on this Illinois team. Don't think he's necessarily a redshirt candidate, but I think he'll maybe spot minutes here and there, foul trouble, injuries, but I think he's probably the 11th guy in this rotation. Any thoughts on Jake Davis?
I believe what Brad Underwood said at Media Day was Jake Davis is a guy I believe in, which kind of tells you all you need to know. Like he's not like you said, he's not going to be playing too much this year, but definitely intriguing potential as a shooter. He shot upper 30s, I think, as a freshman at Mercer, averaged 9 a game. I think he shot
38.7.
38.7 on I think 5 attempts a game. Yeah, so definitely potential as a shooter, but like you said, probably not a lot of potential as a contributor this year.
Let's move on to the freshmen. We spent a lot of time. We'll have to go slightly quicker here to make sure we're not here for 2 hours. But this freshman class is, as anticipated, a freshman class as Illinois has had in a long time. It is the number 3 freshman class in America, according to 24/7 Sports. And this is where the ceiling of this team can get raised. The potential of some of these guys is really, really exciting. We'll start with the guy who's been the off-season hype champion coming out of Ubben Basketball Complex, and that is Kasparis. Kasparis actually is how he said he pronounces it. I made sure to get that at Media Day because I've been calling him Kasparis. It's Kasparis.
Same, yeah.
Yakichonis. So we'll set the record straight. Just a forewarning, I'll probably call him Kasparis 800 times this year, but we'll start off on the right foot. Kasparis Yakichonis from Lithuania, ranked 36th overall according to 24/7 Sports, averaged 19, 7, and 6 for FC Barcelona. He was kind of playing on their second team, which is where a lot of the younger guys are. FC Barcelona, one of the best teams in all of Spain. And he did play a little bit on their main team, but a guy that can really do a little bit of everything. He played in the Adidas Next Generation tournament overseas this summer at a 17-assist game. Unbelievable passer. His vision is phenomenal. He's a guy that I expect to have the ball in his hands a lot. For as much as Kylan Boswell, I think, was brought in to kind of be the true point guard, would not surprise me if Kasparis Yakichonis is handling the ball in key situations for Illinois this year. As his passing, he's about as good of a playmaking prospect as I've seen come through Illinois in a long time. In terms of what his potential can be, but he can score it too. He's had some big scoring games, had a 36-point game in one of the under-18 tournaments he was playing in this summer. Got pretty good shooter, guy who can get to the rim, and just does a little bit of everything. 6'5", 200. I think he said he was 205 at Media Day now. And this guy has been hyped up. You hear a lot of the buzz coming out of Illinois this offseason, and it's Kasparis Yakichonis is the real deal, and Jonathan Gavoni has him as his number 15 overall prospect on his big board. I saw one mock draft that had him as high as 6, so there's lottery pick one and done potential here for Yakichonis. This guy could be one of the better players in the Big Ten if he lives up to his potential. Obviously, a freshman making the transition from overseas, all of that, but his skill set is as unique of a skill set as Illinois has brought in, and I couldn't be more excited for what he could ultimately become.
Oh, I'm pumped up too. Seeing the NBA mock drafts is one thing, but like seeing highlights, starting at Barcelona when he was 16 years old, he's still only 18 years old. Like there is so much to be excited about with KJ. I'm calling him KJ the whole year. I'm not pronouncing that name.
That's what Brad calls him too, so that's good with me. I'll start doing that too.
Yeah, but just some things I like. Big guard. He can rebound for his size. He can play on the ball a lot, which he did a lot at Barcelona with Lithuania in the Euros. One thing I like about his scoring is he can kind of get it done from every level. Like, because if he's coming to Illinois and he's just a knockdown 3-point shooter and can't do anything else, there's going to be games where he's just completely limited. But he can get to the hoop. He can shoot the 3 ball, which he will a lot this year. And then passing wise, like you said, phenomenal passer, some really flashy passes, but just a really consistent passer and playmaker. Defense is going to be a concern, but let's keep this short. We're not even going to mention that. But defense and turnovers, possible concern, but the potential is just so fun that I'm not really too worried about it.
Yeah, those are the two. I think defensively he's been pretty good. I think he's got a big body. He can play pretty physical, 6'5". I think that there's room for growth there on the defensive end. I don't think he's necessarily a negative that can be attacked constantly on the defensive end. But that's something where you'd hope that that develops. And then, yeah, with a guy that's going to make a lot of flashy passes, a really good playmaker, but also can turn the ball over, can get a little Andre Curbelo-y in terms of trying to make the unbelievable pass that really isn't there. That's part of his game as well. That's something you almost just have to live with his skill set, because he's going to have some highlight reel plays as well. But yeah, and offensively, he can score it for sure. Good shooter. I like his jump shot. Good shooter off the dribble as well. He's got some step back and movement shooting to his game. But also, I think the thing that really has stood out to me about him playing overseas is just the fact that I think as much as he can score and he can have some big scoring games, he's really not a guy that's going to force his shot. There's games where he really won't attempt a lot of shots. He's a facilitator. He'll kind of take what the game gives him. And I think that's going to be something that you think about. A guy who's going to have the ball in his hands late in games a lot. Illinois hasn't had to worry about answering that question a lot because you've had Terrence Shannon and Ayo Dosunmu. Now you're going to have to find that guy. I think Kasparis has that decision-making and that calmness to his game and that ability to not force offense for himself, which I think a lot of freshmen, especially as highly regarded as him, have a lot. I think he is really a pass-first guy, but a guy that's willing to attack and be aggressive when the matchup is right. But his talent's unbelievable, and I think his ability is to be a lottery pick if his season goes correctly. And we have another lottery pick to get to as well, but I think Kasparis could be Illinois' best player and ultimately their highest drafted player since Darren Williams if his season goes as it can.
Yeah, there's potential for that. Brett Underwood even said maybe a week ago that if Illinois had a game right now, he said something about the offense would pretty much be running through KJ, which is just awesome to see from a freshman that's been in Champaign for only a couple months. But moving on to the next potential lottery pick, which you don't say that a lot for the Illinois Fighting Illini, man. Will Riley. I'm not going to talk too much here because I think everybody kind of knows what you're getting out of Will Riley. Underwood used the term natural scorer to describe pretty much the whole roster at Media Day, but I don't think there's one player that applies to more so than Will Riley. You watch this guy's highlights, and he will take some of the most wild, just like awkward looking pull-up shots, pull-up threes from 30 feet that you've ever seen in your life, which is going to be an adjustment for some Illinois fans because we don't see that a whole lot. But let me tell you, he makes 60% of them. Like he is the most. I don't watch the NBA too much, but he looks like Kevin Durant to me. He'll need some work defensively and stuff, but I mean, I'm so optimistic about Will Riley. I think he's a guy that could be taking the last shot off a pass from KJ potentially, like you were just talking about. But this guy can play off the ball, on the ball. He can sit in the corner and hit threes, pull up from threes from the top of the key, get to the hoop at will. He's 6'8", just super long, super athletic, pretty. Actually, not that fast, but he's athletic. And I'm just so optimistic. You can see why this guy has NBA draft lottery potential.
Yeah, 6'8", and he looks every bit of 6'8". A guy who just lit it up in high school, averaged 27 a game, top 5 in scoring on the EYBL circuit, averaging 22 a game, had a 42-point game at Peach Jam, which pretty much took the entire event by storm. He is just a scorer, and yeah, I think you look at what some of the shots he's able to make. You talk about a tough shot maker, a guy that is a good shot creator, creates his own shot, but a lot of them are tough shots, and he makes them anyway. He when he gets on a roll, when he gets in a rhythm offensively, I think this is a guy that is going to have a couple 30-plus point games, a couple just explosions where he's feeling it as a 28-point second half, where you just get him the ball in isolation and get out the way. That's what he's able to do. And he's crafty offensively. He can score from all three levels. Good athlete. long strides, can play out in transition really effectively, plays above the rim. His mid-range shot is maybe the most impressive part of his game, just being able to elevate over guys and create that shot off the dribble, going to both sides, going with both hands. And his three-point shot, I think he can spot up and space the floor and knock down threes at a high clip as well and create some of those. And I think that the one thing, too, that I'm interested to see from him is he's an underrated passer, too. You talk about a guy that you can put in some ball screens and some certain actions offensively and allow him to make decisions. I think he's an underrated passer. I talked to him at Media Day on Friday. He said, I asked him what's some of the things that in order to ultimately become a lottery pick that the NBA wants to see from you, and he said, improving my passing, playmaking, that's something I think I've been doing really well this offseason. We've seen that in some of the clips that Illinois put out. I think he can do it all offensively. We'll see defensively, like you said. Some quicker guys can probably beat him. Maybe not the most laterally quick, but a guy that I think can disrupt things with his length. I think he'll be a guy that gets a lot of deflections and just create some havoc on the perimeter and can hold his own against some bigger guys as well. That's the other thing, too, as the season goes on. He's already added, I think, 10, 15 pounds since coming in, but pretty lean, lanky build. And I think getting in the weight room with Fletch as much as he can and just continuing to build up his body will be big for him. But his potential's through the roof. And yeah, I think talk about just pure scorer and a guy that I think is going to have maybe some of the biggest scoring nights of anybody on this Illinois team when he's on. Will Riley's that guy. I see a couple 30-point nights in his future for sure.
Oh, I would love to see it, man. And talking about the passing, Underwood's got me really hyped up here. Media Day was awesome to be at because Underwood was just calling everybody
Everybody's
just a
amazing
future
at
star.
those, right?
Yeah. But he mentioned Will Riley as or maybe elite, phenomenal, whatever word he used, lob passer, which has me so excited about potential with him as a lob passer, KJ as a passer, which we all know he's going to be really good at, Boswell as a passer. And then he's hyping up these 6'10", 7-foot guys, Marez Johnson, Kerry Booth, Tommy Slav as well, I'm sure, as just freak athletes. So, I mean, I'm feeling some lobs, some throwdowns in Champaign, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be a team that plays above the rim a lot. There's going to be a lot of dunking with this group. There's just so many athletes and just so many talented offensive players. Let's get to a guy you mentioned, though. And this is a guy that we've been waiting to show up for 3 years. He's been committed since before his sophomore year of high school started at St. Rita before transferring to Thornton. And in-state prospect 2024 Mr. Basketball in the state of Illinois, Marez Johnson, is finally here in Champaign. And the word, you look up the word dog in the dictionary, Marez Johnson's picture's right there. This guy his motor is unbelievable. Led everything and it led everybody in rebounding on the AAU circuit. 17 points, 14 rebounds, 3.5 blocks a game as a senior at Thornton Township. And I'm excited about it. He's one of those guys that I think just brings a totally different mentality and skill set. When you talk about all these really talented, versatile offensive pieces on this Illinois team, Marez Johnson's just the guy that you're going to put in. He's going to play his tail off. He's going to do a lot of the dirty work. Best rebounder on this team. Guy that I think can impact things defensively as well. And this is a guy we've been waiting for a long time. I think there's a lot of development still in his future. I think he's a guy that ultimately down the road could be an NBA prospect. But Marez Johnson at the center spot, I think that's where he'll primarily play this year. He's a little undersized for the five spot at 6'8", but makes up for it with his physicality, with his motor, with his rebounding ability, with his athleticism. And I think he is really, really intriguing. He's going to play a big role on this team.
Yeah, I think him just being committed to Illinois for 3+ years as a high schooler tells you pretty much all you need to know about Marez Johnson. He wants to be here. He wants to be on the court. The motor is there. He's going to be a beast defensively, even if he's a bit undersized at the 5, like you were saying. He will be the best rebounder on the team as a freshman, which as a whole, also, I think this team is going to be phenomenal rebounders once again. There's just so much athleticism, so many guys that are massive for their position that I think it's going to really pay off in the long run. But back to Marez, He's going to be the one catching lobs as well. I can't wait for that. He's going to be a low post scorer. Doesn't really have too much range to his offensive game, which I'm not really worried about for him as a freshman. Like that's just not his game right now. He could develop that over the next couple of years, preferably. But yeah, super optimistic about Perez. Phenomenal rebounder. He's going to be very good in the low post as a freshman. And yeah, he's worked his tail off to be here, and he's here now. And I think everybody in the Illinois fan base and on the staff is really excited to see him.
Yeah, I think Brad Underwood really raved about him as a lob threat, him as a rim runner, a guy that in ball screens is just can go catch it from anywhere. I think you're going to see a lot of those where you put Morez Johnson in pick and rolls with KJ, with Kylan, with Will Riley. You let him roll to the rim, and I think he's going to do a lot of damage. I think offensive rebounding is going to be big for him. His motor is unbelievable. In terms of high school prospects coming into Illinois that I've seen, his just motor on every single play is as incredible as I've seen from a player. I think Brad Underwood is going to really hate taking him off the floor a lot. There's going to be some limitations. There's going to be probably some foul trouble for him, and offensively, I do think that there's still some development that needs to happen there. But I think Brad Underwood is going to love having him on the floor just because of the way he plays and just some of that dirty work stuff. And I think defensively too, Illinois is going to need his ability to do some of the things that Coleman Hawkins could do defensively in terms of going out guarding on the perimeter. He's mobile, a really mobile big and athletic and can be a shot blocker even at 6'8". Probably not a great rim protector, but a guy that I think just with his athleticism and getting back into plays, recovering, I think he can do some of that. So, yeah, he's kind of been my guy for a long time. I'm really excited to see him play, and his role could be bigger than we even thought because we'll transition it now into another freshman who is technically a freshman. He's also 21 years old, so I don't know. I always find it interesting lumping him into the freshman. He's a freshman eligibility wise, but he's been a pro. He has experience. Tomislav Ivisic coming over from Croatia. And the reason I say that about Morez is Tomislav Ivisic is not currently eligible to play for Illinois as we sit here on October 15th. Brad Underwood said on Friday they're still waiting in terms of getting his eligibility granted by the NCAA. Similar situation to what his brother went through at Kentucky, Zvonimir Ivisic, who didn't get cleared till early January. I'm not even going to get into this right now, but the NCAA, I can't understand why it takes 5 months to get an answer on this type of stuff. Just give Illinois an answer, let them know what their roster is going to look like. It feels like this might drag into the season a little bit. The expectation is still that Tomislav Ivisic will play for Illinois for the majority, if not all of this season. But as we sit right now, he is not able to play. But assuming he ultimately is able to play, what are your thoughts on Tomislav Ivisic, 7'1", coming over from Croatia?
Yeah, my favorite part, I think what you have to start with is what you started with as well. The fact that he's 21 years old and he's been playing pro in Europe for several years at this point. That's just a huge thing for this Illinois team that has a couple young pieces in the backcourt that we just talked about in Kerry Booth and Morez Johnson Jr. So that's obviously huge. The eligibility is going to be an issue. I'm not holding out hope that he's eligible to start the year because I've seen what the NCAA has done for a couple like as long as I've been watching basketball. They find a way to just screw stuff up. But there's a chance, and I think if he is on the court, he will be a huge piece for this team. Probably the starting center if he's eligible. A complete true stretch five, which is going to be awesome for Illinois because Hanserhouse is a stretch four. You got Will Riley shooting threes at the three, pretty much up and down the lineup. You have 3-point shooters from top to bottom, which will be just, I mean, the sky is the limit for this offense with or without Big T. But yeah, with him will be awesome. He can get it done in the low post too. Like he's 7'1", as you mentioned. That's going to be huge for the Big Ten for the team rebounding as well. But I think he can still be relevant as a low post scorer in the Big Ten, even though kind of his calling card is being a stretch five and stretching the floor by shooting threes. Decent passer too. I'm not sold on him as a defender, but being 7'1" kind of makes up for that because he's just a shot blocker automatically given his height and wingspan. But yeah, as a 21-year-old freshman, I'm excited for him. I really hope he is eligible, but like I said, I'm not really holding out hope, but we'll see.
Yeah, he's what can really make this offense what it mirror what it was last year in terms of efficiency like to have a guy who Brad Underwood now again take it with a grain of salt preseason hype. Brad Underwood said he could be a mid 40s 3-point shooter, and based on what based on what we've seen so far in some of the clips that have been released, he did shoot, I believe, 38, 39% his final season. Actually, no, he shot 38, 39% for his career overseas, shot 42% last season over playing for SC Derby in the Adriatic League. This is a true stretch five, a guy who I don't know what the volume is going to look like in terms of his 3-point shooting, but he's a guy that can absolutely make him. He's a guy you have to account for and not leave open as a five-man going out on the perimeter and shooting the ball. I think Illinois will put him in a lot of pick and pop stuff with some of their guards. I also think just his presence in order to space the floor is going to allow guys like Will Riley, guys like Boswell, Yakichonis, Morez Johnson, even if those guys play together, which I think we'll see a little bit of this year, to just the ability to operate. And yeah, I think I'm interested to see, like, is there one thing at 7-1? Can he play as big as that? Can he be a true, like you said, interior presence for Illinois? I feel like he has a tendency to get overmatched a little bit, even with that size. I think rebounding is something that he's not a great rebounder, even at that size. Rim protection, shot blocking, hasn't been a great shot blocker. Can he improve at some of that stuff? Because just that size, having that on the floor is going to be huge for Illinois going up against some of the better centers. They play a couple really good centers in the non-conference. You know the Big Ten's going to have some good big guys. That size itself will help Illinois counter that, but can Ivisic be that presence, be a little bit more physical, be a better rebounder, stand up in one-on-one post matchups defensively? We'll see on all of that stuff, but his ability to stretch the floor, his offensive ability, and I think he will overall improve the rim protection for this Illinois team, because even if he's not blocking a ton of shots, having that 7-1 size, having that wingspan and that length at the rim when Illinois is sitting back in drop coverage, I think will affect a lot of shots and make Illinois better defensively in some of those ball screen situations than they were last year when Coleman Hawkins was getting picked apart. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think Ivisic is a very big ceiling raiser for this team, because you talk about the eligibility. Like, if he's not eligible for a long stretch of the season, I have a lot of concerns about Illinois holding up size-wise on the interior, having to play Morez Johnson as really your only center, and even he's undersized. And then all of a sudden, who are you going to after that? Kerry Booth at center, Rickhouse at center. It gets a little dicey there. If Ivisic is eligible and you're able to play him in that starting lineup and just play a totally different way with his ability to space the floor and just that size, I think is a big game changer for this team. So I hope he's eligible. I hope the NCAA wakes up and makes a decision on that, because I think he'll be really important.
Yeah, he's definitely a potential X factor for this team. And like you mentioned, I forgot to mention this earlier, but the front court, I think as a whole is the X factor for this team, because I'm expecting pretty consistent production from Boswell, from KJ, from Will Riley and those wings, if you want to count them as backcourt pieces. But yeah, the front court has a couple young guys with Morez and Kerry Booth who just aren't proven at this level yet. Both have really high ceilings, both freak athletes, like we've talked about a bunch. But just in terms of experience against the great bigs, like you mentioned in the non-con, and a pretty talented Big Ten conference, there will be some questions night to night if Big T is not eligible. Even if Big T is eligible, like, these guys have to perform every single night because there's some really talented players and teams in this conference. But I think having House will be a big help for this team, because he's 22 or 23 in his fifth year of college ball. And I think he'll be a pretty proven scorer and player every single night. But yeah, that group of three guys, Big T, Morez, and Kerry Booth, I think that group as a whole, like you said, can raise the ceiling of this team pretty high. Or if they don't perform as well as we want them to, could, I guess, limit Illinois a little bit. But I think overall we'll still have a phenomenal year either way.
Final freshman Jason Jaxtis, guy that by all accounts will probably redshirt this year, so we won't spend much time on him, but interesting prospect long term, stretch four, guy who shot it well from three in high school, but just needs some body development, some physical development, and good year to do that with the way this team is stacked out. I don't think you'll need him, and I anticipate he will probably redshirt. So we'll move on to our final category, which is a pretty small category, returners. There's only two of them on scholarship, Ty Rogers and Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn. We'll start with Ty, a guy that did start every game for your Elite Eight team last year, averaged 6 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, 2 assists a game. We know what he is. Good defender at his position, which I think will help him a lot this year, moving back to the wing, not having to play point guard, being able to guard his position. Awesome rebounder, great rebounder for his size, guy that gets after it on the offensive glass. Showed a lot of improvement in terms of his game around the basket last year, his explosiveness off the dribble, getting to the paint. Not a guy who's going to shoot. We'll see if the jump shots from the summer that we saw and the jump shots that he says he's been working on actually show up in the game. I have my doubts if they do. If all of a sudden Ty Rogers becomes a threat from the outside, totally different player. I'm going to operate under the assumption for now that this is the same old Ty Rogers, a very useful player, a very impactful player when he's on the floor, but will be very interesting to see where he factors in to this crowded rotation. What are your thoughts on Ty coming back for his junior year?
First of all, super glad he's back. He probably could have went somewhere and had success in a starter role at a different college, but he stayed. He's committed to the process. I'm with you on questioning the jump shot. I'm just assuming it's probably not going to be there this year, which is fine because, like we've talked about for the past hour, pretty much everyone on this team is a shooter, except a couple guys. But like when Ty was playing last year, first of all, he was a point guard, not at his natural position, which I'm excited to see him back at the wing this year. That'll be awesome. Take some stress off him. But as a shooter, like last year, Damask, Justin Harmon, Dane Danger, some of these guys that were in the lineup when Ty was in, not really knockdown shooters, but hopefully with added shooters in Hanserhouse, Will Riley, KJ, all these guys, Big T if he's eligible, that kind of spaces the floor, takes some pressure off Ty Rogers again. And I think that could let Ty Rogers just go to work, back to the basket, drive past these smaller guys that are going to be on him. I'm pretty optimistic for Ty. Like you said, defensively, when he's guarding his own position, he's in a good spot. I'm a big fan of Ty Rogers on defense. But yeah, probably taking a bit of a backseat. I'm not predicting him to start every single game this year on an Elite Eight team. But still optimistic about Ty. I like what he brings to the team for sure.
Yeah, he's got a skill set that this team doesn't really have at a lot of these other spots, and I think could be important when you talk about his defensive ability, his ability to rebound, and just one of those guys that with all this offensive skill, a guy that can really play on that end, and also a guy that I think took a step forward offensively last year. It's just that the question for him is he going to get played off the floor in certain matchups like he was against Purdue, like he was against UConn, where all of a sudden you put your big guy on him, you dare him to shoot, you basically ignore him, play 5-on-4, allow your big guy to roam around the rim, guarding Ty Rogers, and you pretty much got to pull him off the floor. So I that's the one thing we'll see on that, especially if you're going to be in some athletic lineups with a lot of shooting on the floor. I do wonder if Ty Rogers could limit those lineups a little bit. I also do think, though, he can add a lot to some of those lineups and add a lot of experience, defensive ability, and just some of the things that some of these younger guys don't quite have yet. I think he'll make an impact for sure. I do question just how much he'll play this year because you think about how crowded this rotation is, and you just think about some of the limitations that Ty has. I do wonder if there are certain games where maybe he doesn't factor in as much, but I think he's proven himself as an impactful player, and I think there'll be certain games where he really will be one of the keys and a guy that could change a game for you, as we saw even last year. So it'll be interesting to see with him. Last guy, Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, returning, only played 7.1 minutes a game last year. There were some games he didn't play. Comes back this year. I think he will play a little bit. How much? we'll see. That a lot of that will depend on how your starting backcourt ends up performing. But this was a pretty highly rated recruit a year ago. A guy, he's got a lot of offensive potential. He's explosive. He's a heck of an athlete for his size, even though he's a smaller guard. He can really fly down the floor. Probably Illinois' fastest player, one of their fastest players. And a guy that I thought showed some flashes defensively last year as well. Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, expectations from you.
I don't know what my expectations are, but I will say we've talked about how talented the backcourt is with Boswell and KJ, but that's kind of where you're at with guards. Like if something were to happen, injury or something, suspension, whatever it could be, Dre Gibbs Lawhorn is kind of the third guard, and third guard is the final guard on this roster, unless you want to put Ty Rodgers back in the backcourt. But yeah, like you said, offensive capabilities through the roof. He was a high-rated recruit. We saw flashes like in the first game of the year last year. He went for 20. He's throwing down transition dunks. He's hitting threes left and right. He's doing everything offensively. The rest of the year, not so much, just because we have Terrence Shannon Jr., Marcus Damask, all these guys that were all Big Ten players. But yeah, kind of the same situation for DGL this year, but he is in a decent spot in the backcourt given that there's only three guys. His defense will get him on the floor, and I think it will keep him on the floor. Even if he's not the best defender, he shows probably more heart than anybody on the roster. He's just ultra competitive. And then the offense, too, like he can hit threes. He didn't shoot super great last year, but I think that was just a bit of a fluke because he wasn't really playing too much, not a huge sample size. But I'm optimistic about DGL. I think he breaks the 10 minutes per game barrier. And I think he's a pretty good contributor for this team. He'll get a bucket when he needs to, and I think he can lock down when he needs to.
Yeah, you said it right there. I think there's a role for him because he's the only guard Illinois has coming off their bench, assuming that the starting backcourt is Kylan Boswell and Kasparis Yakichonis. He's the only guard you have other than those two guys. Now, of course, Ty Rodgers can slide down to guard. Trey White can slide down to guard a little. You can mix and match some things. Will Riley can even play as a really big guard in some lineups. But I think there will be a role for him because you're going to need his presence on the perimeter. I think especially defensively, I thought that's where he flashed last year. Now, he fouled a little bit too much. But in terms of his lateral quickness, his ability to stick with really quick guards on the perimeter, smaller, quicker guards. I think that's where his role could really be important for this team. And yeah, his efficiency offensively last year was really bad. 34% from the field, 22% from three. Like you said, he was playing 5 minutes one night, 0 minutes the next two nights. There was no rhythm established there with him. He was a really talented offensive player in high school as a prospect. I don't think that that's indicative of what he is. I do think a key for him, if he wants to stay on the floor, is going to be shot selection, not forcing things. I think there were times last year where he really would kind of come in and say, hey, I'm going to get a shot up or two here. And I think that just being more of a facilitator and fitting into more of a role and just taking more of what the defense is giving him as opposed to forcing some things will improve that and allow him to contribute offensively as well. But it'll be interesting to see. I do think that there absolutely is a role for him, though, like you said, because Illinois just doesn't have a ton of true guards on this roster, and he's one of really three. So there will be guard minutes to be had for him, and I'm excited to see. I think he's a guy that could take a pretty big jump, even if it's not statistically just based on volume. I think in terms of his impact can take a pretty big jump this year, and his minutes can be pretty impactful. Will be interesting to see that.
Yeah, I think offensively, personally, I don't even mind when he was coming in last year and just chucking because just based on his high school tape, he could make those shots. They didn't fall last year because he's playing 2 minutes a game or whatever. And then defensively, I think just hustling and being competitive is half the battle. Even if he's not the most skilled defender, he's a bit undersized as a one or two guard. It doesn't really matter. Like, I think he has the dog in him, like we said about Merez a couple minutes ago. So I think him just hustling and showing effort on defense is more than half the battle. And I think he'll get on the court a decent amount this year. Will he? I mean, I don't know. I'm optimistic about him. I still like his offensive game, but I think he'll be on the court a decent amount.
Let's end here with a starting lineup prediction and just kind of some rotation thoughts, how this rotation will look. I'll let you start because I'm interested to see if we have different lineups here, but it's really as hard of as this question has been since Brad Underwood has been here. And there's going to be somebody, even just taking the starting lineup out of it, there's going to be somebody that we talked about that we were high on that isn't going to play that much because there's only 200 minutes here. And there's going to be a lot of guys that are worthy of playing more than they do. It's going to be fascinating to see Brad Underwood sort through this thing and figure out this rotation at least by the middle of the year, by the end of the year. Where do you have things in your mind right now?
I have Kylan Boswell as the everyday starting point guard, KJ at the two. I think the three is where there's some questions, obviously, because you've got talent with Riley, White, Rogers, all these guys. I think Will Riley's the day one starter, and I think he starts most of the year, if not the whole year. The four, I think Big Ben's got it locked down. And the five, assuming Big T is eligible, I think it's Big T. But if he's not eligible for some reason, I guess I'm going to Rez. Like, I don't know. I think your point about somebody being buried, I think that kind of comes down to likely Carey Booth if Big T is eligible. Because I think Trey White and Ty Rogers are going to play a heck of a lot of minutes for this team this year, even if they're not starting at the three or four or two or whatever. And then I think Dre, just given the lack of backcourt depth, is bound to play a decent amount of minutes too. So that leaves Carey Booth, um, maybe Merez. I think Merez fits somewhere in there, but I think Carey Booth slides down. And then obviously Jake Davis and Jason Jackstis too.
We have the same lineup. Yeah, that's my five, I think. Because I just don't think you're keeping the three spots, the one where I feel like the other four spots, I have a pretty good grasp. Now, someone could surprise. I don't know. And of course, the eligibility thing is big too. I think it'll be interesting to see. There's a chance Merez Johnson starts even if Ivisic is eligible. I personally would start Ivisic from day one and see how that plays out during the season, but that's something that could happen. I think the three spot is where there's kind of a three-way battle. I think you could make a case for all three guys, Will Riley, Trey White, Ty Rogers, and why they deserve to start, but ultimately only one of those guys is a lottery pick, a potential lottery pick, and only one of those guys is a five-star prospect, and for me to believe that guy's not going to start on day one, I can't wrap my head around that. So that's my five as well. I agree with you. I think in general, rotation-wise, I think Merez Johnson's going to play a lot of minutes, primarily backing up the five, but I think we will see him at the four a little bit as well in certain lineups. I think those two wings will play 20-plus minutes a game. Trey White, Ty Rogers, I think both those guys will slide up and play the four in some lineups as well. They have that versatility too, especially if you're playing a team that maybe is playing three wings or something like that, and then you counter that. And I think Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn will probably play 15 minutes or so a game because I just think that guard rotation is going to need another body there. Carey Booth is the guy. I do expect him to be on the floor. I think it'll be matchup based for him a little bit, and I'm interested to see. I think he's a guy that could play himself into more minutes if he really kind of pops and takes a big leap based on what he was last year and is kind of ahead of schedule. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because, man, you've got 10 guys that I think all deserve to play. I don't even want to get into the discussion of like, well, you got to keep everybody happy and everything like that because that's part of it as well. But somebody is going to be playing 5-10 minutes a game that we didn't expect. Somebody is going to be kind of pushed out of this rotation at some point. It's going to be fascinating to see. Brad Underwood's paid the big bucks to figure these things out, but this is really hard. It's a great problem to have. I mean, I'm not complaining about this problem. On the list of problems, it's too many good players on your basketball team to fit into a rotation is very low on the list, but this will be interesting because I think there'll be some situations where guys just aren't playing all that much and they probably deserve to, but this team is pretty loaded. I am really excited to see. This is as excited as I've been for a season to start, mainly because of the unknown. Like you sit down and you watch that exhibition game against Ole Miss on October 27th or the season opener against Eastern Illinois, and like everything that happens is interesting. Everything, everybody that's on the floor, I'm interested to see. It's unprecedented territory. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, just with our starting lineup, our agreed upon starting lineup, I see the three guards. I see like a nine-man rotation. I see three guards and KJ, Boswell, and Dre, three wings and Riley, Trey White, and Ty Rogers, and then three bigs, assuming Big T is eligible, Big T, Merez, and Ben Hanserhouse. And then I think Kerry Booth just kind of slides in the 10-man spot and isn't playing too much. My one concern with our agreed upon starting lineup is it seems like you have the entire offensive firepower in the five-man starting lineup, and then you kind of have three of your presumed better defenders and Merez, Trey White, and Ty Rogers coming off the bench right away, and Dre as well. So I think that could be a bit of an issue, but I think that also leads to those four guys off the bench getting in the game right away if the defense is lacking at the start of the game. So yeah, I mean, like you said, it's going to be super interesting, even in the exhibition against Eastern Illinois, against all these non-con bye games. Yeah, super interesting to see, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, you're right. I think the two things with that lineup, one being, yeah, I think you kind of haven't balanced the offense defense aspect as well as you maybe would want to. Now, of course, I think it's not necessarily going to be a platoon sub or anything like that, so you can still mix and match lineups if you're Brad Underwood, but that's a consideration. And then it's going to be really young. Like that's a young lineup for the most part with playing those two freshmen and Avicic being new to college basketball. You do have the experience with Boswell and Humrickhouse in there, but you know what? There's going to be concerns with every lineup, but there's also going to be so much upside with every lineup that it's just so intriguing to me. And yeah, Brad Underwood said that his biggest focus this offseason was positional size and shooting. That starting lineup would have all of that, maybe be as dynamic in those two areas as any team in the Big Ten. And more than most teams in the country, and that it could be pretty fun. Could be looking at offensive efficiency numbers like last year's team that was top three in the country with that lineup on the floor, for sure. But any last thoughts as we close out this marathon first episode to kick off the season?
Yeah, we went a bit long here, but I think it's deserved. Like this team is so talented. Just being at media day, like seeing these guys in person, there's so much length. You can tell how athletic these guys are. Everybody seems really bought in. Even the freshmen like KJ and Will Riley. You talk to them, they're not worried about their draft stock. I mean, they don't care at all. They're locked in on winning a national championship, a Big Ten title, all this stuff. So this is about as excited for a team, or an Illinois team, as uh, I've been in the past couple of years. I'm sure it's the same for you and the rest of the fan base. So yeah, I'm ready to get into it in less than 3 weeks.
Less than 3 weeks. Yeah, Monday, November 4th, Illinois tips it off against Eastern Illinois. And yeah, I can't wait for that. We will be back throughout the season, breaking this team down, discussing everything. Couple more episodes will be out before this season is underway. Of course, that Ole Miss scrimmage is coming up in under 2 weeks now on October 27th. But we'll talk some more team expectations, kind of break down offensively and defensively what this team can look like. Keep talking about some of these lineup discussions. We'll also get into the schedule, which is a pretty loaded non-conference schedule for Illinois, the Big Ten schedule, and a lot of those tip times were released here recently. So we'll dive into that a little bit, and we'll take a bigger look at the Big Ten as a whole and where Illinois could stack up. So those are some of the things coming your way before this season tips off. But we'll cut it at an hour 20. That seems good enough for this first episode. Hit every guy on the roster. I thought that was great to break it down and just get me even more excited about this talent that Illinois has. But make sure you go follow our X account / Twitter. I'll still call it Twitter at Champagne on Ice. We'll be posting our new episodes and some little discussion things on there all season long. Make sure you subscribe to the Field of 68 podcast network on YouTube. That's where you can find our shows streaming. You can get us anywhere else you get your podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and the likes. And we will be back next week to talk some more Illini hoops, talk some schedule, and hope everybody has a great rest of their week. Go Illini as always.